You can lose substantial weight and still carry belly fat. That's because abdominal fat isn't just under your skin. It's also visceral fat packed around your internal organs, wrapped around your stomach, liver, and pancreas. This is the fat-driving chronic condition slowly killing us today. Visceral fat fuels diabetes, fatty liver, heart disease, and even cancer. But while visceral fat is dangerous, it's also the easiest fat to lose once you know how to target it. In this video, I want to show you the fastest way to specifically target visceral fat and burn it off quickly. We're going to cover the best foods and drinks to incorporate into your regimen, then I'll go over the best exercises that will give you the biggest return on investment. Let's start with food because what you eat every day either feeds your visceral fat or starves it. One of the most powerful weapons against visceral fat are carotenoid-rich foods. Carotenoids are natural pigments in plants. They give carrots their orange color, make tomatoes red, give spinach that dark green hue. But it's not just about color. Carotenoids are powerful antioxidants. That's important because so much of what causes visceral fat is energy excess that eventually leads to inflammation and disrupted metabolism. Carotenoids reduce that stress by neutralizing free radicals, these unstable molecules that damage cells. By removing free radicals, carotenoids help stabilize your genes. Specifically, carotenoids can actually help turn on genes that burn more fat and quiet down genes that tell your body to store fat. There was an interesting randomized double-blind trial in Japan examining whether carotenoid intake affects visceral fat. What they found was that just 8 weeks of eating carotenoid-rich vegetables reduced visceral fat, especially the group randomized to high lycopene and low lutein, which in that study consisted of carrots and cabbage. But I want to emphasize all 4 groups that ate carotenoid-rich vegetables lowered their visceral fat. So how do you get these carotenoids from your diet? Just target your favorite colorful vegetables. Things like carrots, sweet potatoes, bell peppers, spinach, squash, you name it. Any colorful vegetable or fruit is likely to be rich in some type of carotenoid and will help you lose your visceral fat. After carotenoids, another special compound you need to target is catechins. These are flavonoid polyphenol which also act as antioxidants and reduce inflammation. My favorite way to get catechins is by drinking green tea. You hear it all the time, green tea burns fat. And it does. It does so because it's rich in catechins. These compounds basically change how your body handles fat, specifically visceral fat. Catechins help with fat regulation in multiple ways. First, catechins boost your fat oxidation and energy expenditure. They stimulate the nervous system to burn up more fat and boost your overall metabolism. On top of that, catechins also inhibit fat processing enzymes like lipase. They block fat that we eat from being absorbed in the first place. The reason green tea is so powerful is it also contains caffeine which can work synergistically with catechins to enhance that fat utilization or fat burning. There was a double-blind placebo-controlled randomized trial in Japan showing that just 12 weeks of drinking catechin-enriched green tea, about 600 milligrams of catechins per day, resulted in significant reduction in visceral fat. Just remember most green teas are high in catechins, but to really maximize the benefit you want to target green teas that are minimally processed. Those would be matcha or sencha teas. In the grand scheme of things, anything that leads to an energy deficit or calorie deficit will help you lose weight and visceral fat. But targeting these right foods and drinks will help you get there much faster. Once you've dialed in the right foods, the correct exercise regimen becomes that magical multiplier. In fact, the correct type of exercise is a big must when it comes to losing visceral fat quickly. We have studies like this meta-analysis of 117 studies showing that even though both diet and exercise can reduce visceral fat, diet has a larger effect on total body weight loss, while exercise tends to have superior effects on reducing visceral fat. There's an older but very interesting study showing just how powerful small doses of exercise can be. In this study, just 2 45-minute cycling sessions per week at 75% of VO2 peak for 2 months reduced visceral fat by 48%. Almost half in just 2 months. And not only that, this group also improved insulin sensitivity by 41% and lost 18% of subcutaneous fat. This wasn't strenuous exercise by any means that they had to do twice a week. What they did in the study was measure intensity as VO2 peak as opposed to VO2 max. So it's hard to tell exactly what 75% looked like for that average participant. But since the people in the study were likely not professional athletes, I assumed their VO2 peak was lower than their VO2 max or zone 3 range, about 70 to 80% of maximum heart rate. So this exercise would actually put them in the low moderate intensity. That intensity where you can still hold a conversation and speak in full sentences, but you just sound a little winded. Another interesting trend we see from those studies is that total body weight stayed about the same. So remarkable changes in dropping their visceral fat and improving their insulin sensitivity even though there were no measurable changes on the scale. This is such an important point I always talk about with my patients. Do not get discouraged if you're doing all the right things when it comes to nutrition, movement, and proper exercise, but the weight is just not coming off. More often than not, the scale is a pretty poor indicator of your progress because the number on the scale does not necessarily show the changes in your body composition and loss of fat mass. What's the best type of exercise that will help you lose visceral fat and do it fast? Well, a recent systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at 84 randomized controlled trials showed that vigorous intensity aerobic exercise and high-intensity interval training or HIIT are the most effective exercise modalities for reducing visceral fat. Resistance training was still beneficial, but just not as effective when looking specifically at visceral fat reduction. That's not to say forget about resistance training. In fact, resistance training is a must for maintaining your muscle mass, and it's important for your overall health and your metabolism. But if you want to lose visceral fat fast, like over the next few months, it's probably better to dial up your cardio. If we're choosing between HIIT and aerobic exercise, there really isn't a big difference between the effectiveness. Studies that look at direct comparisons show both modalities are very similar with no statistically significant difference between the two in adults. If you really want to dig into the data and literature, there may be a small signal that when it comes to HIIT exercises, you may get a little bit more effectiveness with running as opposed to cycling. There's some studies showing that in kids and young adults under the age of 24, HIIT may be more effective than aerobic exercise. But honestly, we're just splitting hairs at this point. At the end of the day, the way I see it, it doesn't matter if you do high-intensity interval training or aerobic exercise or whether for cardio you choose cycling, running, rowing, or dancing. The best exercise is the one you'll actually stick with because consistency beats the perfect plan every time. So that textbook perfect HIIT protocol that you just dread and only do twice a month is always going to lose out to that walk you enjoy and are able to do several times a week consistently. The ideal protocol, at least based on available studies, would probably be an exercise you can do at least 2 to 3 times a week for at least 45 minutes each. Whatever you choose, it just has to be at least moderate to vigorous intensity, meaning you're getting your heart rate to about 70 to 80% of your maximum capacity. If you're not into measuring or tracking your heart rate, a good rule of thumb is to do a talk test. You know you're doing moderate intensity activity if you can talk in full sentences, but you sound a little out of breath. You know you're doing vigorous intensity exercise if you can only speak in a few words before pausing and taking a breath. The beautiful thing about exercise is the fact that the effects you get are dose-dependent, meaning the more you do, the better are the results. There was a recent study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine showing that participants who exercised more or with higher intensity frequently saw proportionally greater reductions in visceral fat. By contrast, they did not see that dose-dependent response with caloric restriction or dieting, meaning there's a limit to how much you can restrict your calories and you really don't see any additional benefit after a certain point. So you do not need to starve yourself to lose belly fat. Quite the opposite actually. Get enough calories that still keeps you in a small calorie deficit, but you can gradually step up your activity and exercise if you want to lose your visceral fat faster. Understanding why visceral fat responds differently than subcutaneous fat helps clarify why these strategies work so effectively. Visceral fat is metabolically active tissue. It's not just sitting there inert. It's constantly releasing inflammatory compounds and hormones that interfere with your insulin sensitivity and metabolic function. When you target it with the right nutrition and exercise, you're not just burning calories. You're actively reducing the source of metabolic dysfunction. The carotenoids and catechins work by addressing the inflammatory environment that allows visceral fat to accumulate in the first place. They're reducing oxidative stress at the cellular level, which allows your body to regulate fat storage more efficiently. The exercise component works through different mechanisms. Moderate to vigorous aerobic activity specifically targets visceral fat because this type of fat is preferentially mobilized during sustained cardio. Your body accesses visceral fat stores before subcutaneous fat during aerobic exercise because visceral fat is closer to your organs and provides quicker energy release. HIIT works similarly but through a slightly different pathway. The intense bursts followed by recovery periods create metabolic conditions that signal your body to release and burn visceral fat stores. The post-exercise oxygen consumption, often called the afterburn effect, means you continue burning fat even after you finish exercising. One crucial aspect many people overlook is the relationship between cortisol and visceral fat accumulation. Chronic stress elevates cortisol levels, which directly promotes visceral fat storage. This is why someone can eat perfectly and exercise regularly but still struggle with belly fat if their stress levels remain high. The exercise protocols I mentioned, particularly moderate intensity sustained cardio, help regulate cortisol levels. They provide enough stimulus to improve metabolic function without creating excessive physiological stress that would further elevate cortisol. This is why extremely intense exercise programs can sometimes backfire. If you're already stressed and you add highly demanding workouts, you might actually increase visceral fat storage despite burning calories. Sleep quality also plays into this equation. Poor sleep disrupts the hormones that regulate appetite and fat storage, particularly leptin and ghrelin. When you're sleep deprived, your body preferentially stores fat in the visceral compartment. The good news is that regular exercise, particularly the moderate intensity cardio I described, significantly improves sleep quality. So you're getting a compound effect. Better exercise leads to better sleep, which leads to better hormonal regulation, which leads to more efficient visceral fat loss. The timing of your nutrition matters as well. Eating carotenoid-rich vegetables and drinking green tea throughout the day provides sustained metabolic support. The catechins in green tea are particularly effective when consumed before exercise because they enhance fat oxidation during the workout. Some studies suggest having green tea about 30 minutes before your cardio session can amplify the fat-burning effects. The carotenoids work best when consumed with meals because they're fat-soluble nutrients. Having them with a small amount of healthy fat, like olive oil on your salad, increases their absorption and effectiveness. The visceral fat reduction you achieve through these methods creates a positive feedback loop. As you lose visceral fat, your insulin sensitivity improves. Better insulin sensitivity means your body handles carbohydrates more efficiently and is less likely to store them as fat. This improved metabolic state makes it easier to continue losing visceral fat. You're not just fighting against your biology. You're working with it. The inflammatory markers in your blood decrease as visceral fat drops. Lower inflammation means better recovery from exercise, which means you can maintain consistency with your workout routine. It all compounds in your favor. One common mistake people make is focusing exclusively on abdominal exercises thinking they'll spot reduced belly fat. Sit-ups and crunches strengthen abdominal muscles, but they don't preferentially burn visceral fat. The fat loss from those exercises is minimal compared to what you achieve with the aerobic protocols I described. This doesn't mean abdominal work is useless. Strong core muscles improve your posture and support your spine. But if your primary goal is visceral fat reduction, your time is better spent on cardio and resistance training for overall muscle maintenance. The dose-dependent nature of exercise I mentioned earlier deserves emphasis. Unlike caloric restriction, which hits diminishing returns quickly, exercise continues to provide benefits as you increase volume and intensity. Someone doing 45 minutes 3 times per week will see good results. Someone doing 45 minutes 5 times per week will see better results. Someone alternating between moderate and vigorous intensity will see even better results. Your body responds proportionally to the stimulus you provide. This is why building a sustainable exercise habit is so valuable. You're not just working toward a goal and then stopping. You're creating a lifestyle that continuously supports metabolic health. The psychological aspect matters too. Seeing tangible results from your efforts, particularly improvements in how your clothes fit and how you feel, reinforces the behavior. Even when the scale doesn't move, if you're following these protocols, your body composition is changing. Your waist circumference is decreasing. Your energy levels are improving. Your blood markers are getting better. These changes create momentum that makes it easier to maintain the habits long-term. You're not just losing visceral fat for aesthetic reasons. You're fundamentally improving your metabolic health and reducing your risk for chronic disease. That's the real victory.